This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations, a show about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, and our complex relationship with art and entertainment. My name's Hugh, I'm the host, and I'd like to put in a very mild content warning for this show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good. But sometimes there are aspects to the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Read the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Welcome back once again to another episode of Reserved Recommendations, and this week I am joined by Scott Common, who I'm meeting virtually for the first time. It's lovely to make your acquaintance, like face-to-face on Zoom at least.
Yep, absolutely, Hugh. At the moment, I think virtual is the best that we can do, and it's pretty damn good.
It seems to be doing all right for a lot of people, which is neat. It's nice to know that this is feasible if it needs to be.
Yep, absolutely. I wouldn't want it to go on too long term. I miss having face-to-face contact with people and just actually being in proximity to people. But for the moment, it's doing its job.
And just before we start the music talk, may I compliment you in passing on your choice of beverage? I saw it go past the camera, and the Boundary Road is a nice drop. It's a good choice.
Absolutely. We have both beer and wine within the house. However, I thought it was a little bit early in the day for a wine, so beer would do. Excellent.
We won't tell people what time it is because we'll just keep the veil drawn across there. So the thing that you decided that you wanted to talk about today was a one-man band called Christian Fitness. Now, by way of research, I listened to the links that you sent me, which I think is like 4 tracks across 4 albums, but Christian Fitness is just ridiculously prolific. There are 1 million albums, very nearly. And then while I was wandering around the house doing various things, I let Spotify recommend me Future of the Left, which is the other band that the Christian Fitness guy, Falco, is in.
Yep, absolutely. He's had a pretty prestigious and long-lived career, starting way back sort of in the late 90s with his first band, McCluskey, who actually, strangely enough, despite having split up 15 years ago, I actually saw them live earlier this year in Wellington. Yeah, so that was great. I'm pretty certain it was his first time in New Zealand. They, Future of the Left and McCluskey, have done tours of Australia before. They've got quite a solid fan base over there. But, as is with any sort of slightly smaller act, those economies of scale often preclude New Zealand from being perhaps part of the tour schedule, which, totally understand. But it was great to be actually able to see him live, because one of the things that Falco and all his acts have been well known for is their live performances. I think one of Future of the Left's live albums was voted one of the top 50 live albums of all time by some UK magazine. So, your mileage may vary, though opinions are like kittens, so we give them away. He's very, very prolific in terms of his output.
It's an interesting point you make about people often don't make it to New Zealand, because before I moved to Palmy, which is where I am now, I was living in Dunedin for a long time, and often when people did make it to Dunedin, they would go like Auckland, Hamilton, Christchurch, stop. And so you'd be stranded down at the very bottom going, we're here too.
Yep. And you only have the choice of either driving up to Christchurch, which in of itself can make for a great gig experience, because you get that entire road trip thing, you get a couple of people in together, and it adds to the entire event in of itself, but it certainly makes it a fair bit more expensive for the punters as well. So yeah.
So in listening to the tracks that you sent through, the first thing that struck me was that despite being like super noisy and quite aggressive, which makes sense if you go and do some research about the scene that these guys came out of, they're surprisingly poppy.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the things that I've loved about Falco's work, full stop, is that there is this unmitigated enjoyment of the aggressive side of music, but there's still a lot of attention paid to, I guess, to hooks and melodies, vocal intricacies, all that side of things. You know, it's a lovely, finely balanced mix between all of them. And I guess one of the reasons that I have this as a reserved recommendation is that noisier side of things, because they certainly don't hold back on, shall we say, the sonic approach to guitar music.
Yeah, no, there were definitely songs where like one element was something that was a guitar that was like, it was on a clean sound, but definitely not distorted, but also not in key with anything else on purpose, being strummed frantically, like off in the left channel somewhere or something.
Yep.
You know, there's a lot of kind of deliberately jarring stuff that goes on there.
Absolutely, and I mean, again, this is, I mean, from my end of things, I do find that I get a little bit bored if something is, it sounds terrible to say, if it's easily accessible, if it instantly grabs me, if I can instantly pick out where the melody's going and that side of things. But yeah, I like to have to work a little bit mentally to get what's going on in a piece of music. And I mean, that's not true across all my tastes, but it is certainly, I found, in a lot of the bands that have stuck with me over the years, that element is definitely something I get enjoyment from. I'm sort of not a instant hit type person. In fact, usually the big hits are the ones that after a couple of listens, I find my interest in them and my enjoyment in them diminishes somewhat. And I am the sort of person, I'll go back and I'll re-listen to things a lot. I'll reread things a lot as well. You know, if I'm dealing with literature or anything like that, I reread things a lot. Rewatch films. You know, I like getting into the depth that a text has. It's something I find. You know, finding all those little bits that you may miss the first time through, or that particular groove which wasn't that obvious at the first listen, but once you actually sit down and have gone through it a couple of times, heard it a couple of times, it's like, actually there's this entire thing underpinning there in a song which I hadn't even noticed. And that's part of what I enjoy about a lot of the music that I listen to.
And I think the thing about the Falco projects, this is true of the Future of the Left stuff I listen to and the Christian Fitness stuff, is that there is always something to find. Like, I didn't get a chance to spend a huge amount of time with these songs because I basically did all of my listening today. But, you know, when you sit and you listen through the noisiness, you know, the bass line will be quite clever, or there'll be like surprisingly tasty harmonies buried behind a wall of weird guitar noise.
Absolutely.
And even with weird guitar noise, it'll often be sculpted in a kind of sound engineering sense in a way that means that it can sound really aggressive and squawky and wonky, but it doesn't eat everything else. You know, there's a surprising amount of space and clarity for music that's that distorted.
Absolutely. And I mean, from having read interviews with Falco, you know, he talks about how Future of the Left is very much sort of bass driven in their songwriting. And that's very much well, at least I get the feeling it's very much a sort of collaborative project, Future of the Left, which sort of again resonates with the name as well, whereas Christian Fitness is far more driven from the guitar in terms of the songwriting. And of course you're going to get different outputs as well when you've got 4 people or 3 people sitting together to write a song, as opposed to the one man band. So as Christian Fitness sort of presents themselves, of an individual writing all the different parts as well. Everybody's going to have a different, speciality. So that's something that, they seem to find a way to leave a lot of space, even when things get quite filled up with sonic elements. And you're right about the vocal, about some of the harmonies as well. I mean, particularly with some of the later Christian Fitness stuff, there's some quite intricate stuff going on in terms of the voicing, in terms of the harmonies, in terms of the accents. And that's actually something I quite love about Christian Fitness, is that Falco's voice has this amazing range, and I don't mean in terms of sort of the octave range he can hit, but in terms of the personalities and subject positions that he can sort of put himself into. There's a great track, Singing the Bonesaws, where it is basically delivered, that's a Future of the Left track, which is basically delivered as a BBC presenter would. For those of your listeners who may not be familiar with the BBC speaking style, think Stewie from Family Guy, that quite enunciated, very well spoken.
It's the received pronunciation that comes over very well on the wireless. It's very intelligible.
Absolutely. So, I mean, his ability to draw out characters in combination with his lyrics, which, will often position the songs quite differently to if everything was just delivered in one particular singing style. And that's something I highly, highly appreciate about all his projects, is that there's a real range of personalities and subject positions that sort of come out both in the lyrics and in the voice itself.
Yeah, and I think, now that we've mentioned lyrics, it's worth talking about those a bit, because the other thing that struck me is, firstly, you can usually hear and understand the lyrics, which again is unusual when music's this noisy, but they're quite clever. They're often quite funny in a dark kind of way, and there was one point in one of the songs. Now I've saved it. I've left it in a tab so I can find out which one it is. Happiness is Not for Amateurs is the one I'm thinking of. Yep. There's a point where he actually just stops the song to go into a riff on Rage Against the Machine playing Killing in the Name for a little bit. He gets to the end and he does the iconic "fuck you, I won't do what you tell me" from Killing in the Name, only it's most men sweat more than they intend.
Yep. When the jackboots arrive at the front door. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's again, that's probably one of the more sonic tracks in terms of the guitar usage, but that there's that bit in the middle as well where he's talking about, I once spent £15 to sit on a train and listen to a racist abuse a Chinese family, and nobody said anything, so I did, and it went wrong. And I ended up sitting back down for the last 15 minutes of the journey feeling like one of those nice ones, not one of those who ensure the existence of the species. There's a real smartness in the delivery, but there's also a very sort of contemporary observational take on what's going on within society, in particular, and they're based in the UK. McCluskey were out of Cardiff, and there's quite a strong Welsh presence in there, right? So, it's a very multicultural society, and you'll find these things reflected all through sort of both Future of the Left's lyrics and Christian Fitness's lyrics, sort of talking about local attitudes of, I guess, the British people in a lot of cases too. And on that side of things, one thing I would recommend is Future of the Left put out a live album a while ago. It's up on Bandcamp, and Falco is, if he hadn't had a career as a musician, he would have made one hell of a stand-up comic. His in-show banter is without peer. I mean, it's quite amazing. The stuff that just comes off the tip of his tongue is smart. I've never seen anybody deal with hecklers quite in that way. Just some really amazing interaction with the crowds too. So it's not just this case of these lyrics have been sat down and really poured over and fine-tuned. This is the way his brain works, even when put on the spot. And I think that's something that you wouldn't instantly pick out. But once you're exposed to a bit of the live work as well, you realise actually that, this is the way his brain works. These are his views on the world. There's certainly, I'd say there's certainly a sort of absurdist sort of nature to some of the lyrical frameworks that he uses. Not in a way where the lyrics are throwaway, but he will take quite exaggerated metaphors and twist them and leave a lot of space for the listener to sort of interpret them the way that they want to. And that's something else that I really, really appreciate about his work.
Also, I mean, there's it's quite a British thing, and I think it carries over to a New Zealand sense of humour as well. He's not afraid of being quite ambivalent. Like that song that we were just talking about, Happiness is Not for Amateurs. He presents a situation where there's this bad thing happening and he tries to do the right thing and it goes wrong, so he just sits down again. And then he has a final chant about how you're going to get sweaty when the end comes. And that's not a very macho, self-aggrandizing position to take.
No, absolutely. There's certainly an element of quite dark humour. I wouldn't say resigned, because I think resignation would perhaps indicate more of a situation, where he doesn't care. And I think this is one of the things, as he writes about things that he really does sort of care about, whether they're interactions he's had or the way the world around him is evolving and how he interacts with it. But there is this sort of understanding that you can try to do the right thing, but at some point you've just got to sit back and laugh at the dark sort of comedy that is going on in front of all of us. And that sort of, while I may have talked about sort of absurdism in some of his lyrics, I think that sort of represents quite an aspect of realism in how people have to deal every day with bad situations. And sometimes you try to do the right thing and you just have to step back and go, well, nothing I can do about that.
I mean, shall we play a track now? We might play that one that we were just talking about, because it'll give people a sense. I mean,
absolutely.
As you got from Scott skipping a word when he was talking about the lyrics, there is an aggressive swear in the middle of this one, so there is a mild content warning at the beginning of the show, but this is the point at which you need to be aware of your listening environment.
Than they intend when the jackboots arrive at the front door. It be silence please, or finish your vegetables for getting the attention of a child. Read the uncomfortable dynamic between hunter and hunted. I don't know if there is a difference personally. On your own side of the earth, mine is unknown. And here, conversely, you are a mystery. I respect that. But I must destroy it. I want once paid £15 to sit on a train and listen to a racist abuse a Chinese family as we crossed the Tyne Bridge, and nobody said anything, so I did, and it went wrong. And I ended up sitting back down for the last couple of minutes of the journey, feeling like a cunt, and not one of those nice ones. Not one of those that ensure the existence of the species. Well, I like to think that the Chinese family didn't know what was happening, that the language barrier had saved their souls, but really, I know the details were important, and their faces said it all. You are a nation of bastards. We do not belong here. Thank God it was the end of the journey. I had all of those spells on me. Thank God it was the end of the journey. And I had all of those spells on me. Da 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 da. Happiness is not for amateurs. Happiness is not for amateurs. All men sweat more than they intend when the jackboots arrive at the front door. All men sweat more than they intend when the jackboots arrive at the front door. All men sweat more than they intend when the jackboots arrive at the front door. All men sweat more than they intend when the jackboots arrive at the front door.
Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate. If you're a fan of NPR, listening to our podcasts and live stream has never been easier. Just search for accessmedia.nz on the App Store or Google Play and download the app with the kiwi fruit logo. Once you've got it, pick Manawatu People's Radio from the list of stations and go find your new favourite show.
And we are back on Reserved Recommendations. I'm talking to Scott Common about the band's Christian fitness and sort of future of the left, and largely the kind of central figure between those two, a guy who goes by the name Falco, which is a contraction of his actual name, which escapes my brain at the moment.
It's Andrew Falkus.
Andrew Falkus, right. I knew it was like reasonably normal, but also led you in the direction of Falco quite clearly.
I think he'd appreciate being called reasonably normal, to be honest. I think that would probably float his boat quite a bit. I must say, I never get tired of listening to Happiness Is Not For Amateurs. It's a massive go-to track for me, and it was one of the tracks that really sold me on his one-man band project, because he's quite specific. It's not a solo project. He's a one-man band. Never get tired of it, actually. It's a great track. And I found it interesting. You did mention that there was a strong swear within there. But what I actually quite like about the way that he utilizes it in that song is that he actually contextualizes it after he delivers it as well, with the line, but not one of those good ones, not one of those who ensure the existence of our species, So there's a smart usage of language, both for impact, but also sort of putting a bit of context into how language gets used as well.
Yeah, and it's a kind of an acknowledgement in the middle of a noisy pop song about racism that you can offhandedly use a swear, and that can then put down a whole group of people without you necessarily meaning to, and it does that in quite a clever and self-deprecating way.
Yep, absolutely.
So how did you come across Falco and his various projects? Because I realized on listening to, I think it was the Song of the Bonesaws, that that was something that someone had played me at some point. I think along the lines of, there used to be a kind of ongoing contest with people I lived with where you would burst into someone else's room, flatmates, and go, "Here, you like fucked up shit, try this," and then play them something. And I think I got that played to me in that kind of a context because it seemed very familiar. But other than that, the band's, all of his projects have managed to, despite being deeply my shit, have completely gone under the radar for me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I first encountered McCluskey back in the early sort of 2000s. As you know, I'd been playing through a number of bands, and I was at that point in a 8-piece instrumental post-rock band called the Dukes of Leisure, which sounds very pretentious, and it kind of was. At the same point, I was also playing in a 4-piece punk band, and I had my own other sort of garage rock project going as well. And it was actually one of my flatmates at the time, who is now a research scientist in Texas, actually. I don't know why I mentioned that. It just seems like a nice little thing to throw in, who was a massive music head. And he was one of the 2 bassists in the Dukes of Leisure, and like literally had about 800 CDs on his wall, and every day he'd come back home and go, "I've got a new CD." So I ran into McCluskey way back then, and I thought, this is kind of cool. And then it sort of fell off my radar. And I mean, in particular, it was the album. The difference between me and you is that I'm not on fire. Which is a great album title, by the way. And this is something else I love about all of Falco's projects is, again, really great titling for a lot of the songs and albums. And then it was a number of years later when I was no longer playing in bands, no longer really actively involved in music, and I was back up at university. I went to do a degree in my sort of mid-30s, and just a random YouTube search, and a McCluskey track popped up, and I went, "Oh, that's right. I'd forgotten about them. That's a great song." And it's like, "Oh, but this is some other band playing their song." And I went, "Oh, interesting. I'll check that out." And then realised that it wasn't some other band playing this. Well, it was some other band. It was his next band, Future of the Left. And at that point, I sort of went, "Oh, this is great. Okay, let's hear what else they've done." Oh my goodness. Right. So that was about a week's worth of, digging through the back catalogue, buying up the albums, when I had the cash, being a student. And yeah, I just fell directly into Future of the Left. And then ended up finding Christian Fitness. And I mean, I think you mentioned, they're quite prolific. The first 2 Christian Fitness albums that he put out, I know this is reserved recommendations, but I'm not sure while I love some of the songs on them, you can definitely see that was a time where he was working through how to do the recording process himself as well, and working through all those intricacies that you had somebody else to sort of do when you were a musician. And it's quite different when you have to do it yourself. So things like, miking things up and how to do mixes and, how to balance instruments and setting peak gains and whether or not you're going to be using compression and what sort of microphone, all that sort of stuff. And the production on them is a little bit lower, if I can use an understatement. I'm quite happy with that because I grew up listening to live gigs recorded on tape cassettes and a plethora of 4-track recordings as well. But, once it got to this taco is not correct, really noticed, obviously he's gotten a great grip on the recording process. And I think the thing about Christian Fitness for me as well was that it was clear that this was a stage where this is creative output as opposed to output that's directly intended to be pushing a particular market. He already had a solid fan base who he knew were interested in this sort of stuff. And it gave them a bit of creative freedom. So, I mean, that's one of the differences between sort of Future of the Left and Christian Fitness, is there's a bit more experimentation going on. But yeah, so it was a sort of labyrinthine journey that I took through a random YouTube click, which is, you know, I think possibly the best way to find new music these days is just the random click, because I don't tend to use streaming sites myself.
That's a good point, because one of the earlier episodes I was talking to my brother about a duo called the Two Gallants, which he found out about because my dad had a review copy of their CD, because he was reviewing CDs for the newspaper in Dunedin at the time, back in the early 2000s. But, you know, with the increasing demise of physical media, you don't just buy a CD because you like the cover. So the random click on YouTube is increasingly a thing that you would encourage people to do, I guess. Absolutely.
And I mean, actually, Falco's got a bit of a background in terms of the new music ecology in of itself. Back in 2009, one of the Future of the Left albums, Travels with Myself and Others, got leaked online 2 months before it was due out, and Falco ended up publishing a seething sort of open letter, which ended up getting, sorry, I'm just checking some details here, ended up getting printed by UK Music, who took out a full-page advert in The Guardian. And just to read you an excerpt from that, he said, "Please be careful, or we'll get the world we all deserve. Hobby bands who can tour once every few years if they're lucky, and the superstars freed from such inconvenient baggage as integrity and conscience, running the corporate-sponsored marathon of £80 a ticket arena tours and television adverts till their loveless hearts explode in an orgy of oppressive branding and self-regard. Some of us, in all honesty, just want to make the music we love and play it around the world without living in poverty." So perhaps unintentionally, he struck quite a chord there in terms of identifying some of the issues with this new music ecology that sort of has developed. And, you know, that's something I feel quite strongly about. I don't use streaming sites if I can at all. I use Bandcamp. I pay for what I can, you know, in the recognition that somebody's put an awful lot of hard work into this. And it's not only the musician, it's the studio techs, it's the graphic designers, it's the people doing the mixing, it's the mastering technicians, it's the people who are doing the actual printing, because stuff still does get physically produced. And it's easy to miss those individual labor costs in the new music ecology because we're so focused on the image of the pop star, so to speak. The marketing of music these days often does a lot to sort of mask the labor that goes into the production of music. And I don't know if you can tell here, I actually spent a year or two tutoring a popular music studies paper at university. So, you know, this sort of stuff is actually very dear to my heart.
Yeah, I think it's quite telling that while the Future of the Left stuff is all on Spotify, which I use because I actually paid for Spotify specifically for this podcast so people could recommend me things and I could reliably find them without having to illegally download them. But it's telling that while the Future of the Left stuff's all on Spotify, all of the Christian Fitness stuff is just on the Bandcamp page, so you have to hunt through there to find it, which is slightly less accessible, but also Bandcamp is a much more transparent model as someone who uses it myself, in terms of working out what you get in exchange for what.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, don't get me wrong. When I talk about, you know, the ethics of the labor behind music, I'm not wanting to cast shade on anybody who does use streaming services, because there's pros and cons to them, and every person has to make their own decisions about how they consume artistic products within the world. And, I've made my decision because I've experienced what it's like to try and actually produce music over, 25 years now. And that's fine. But I also don't want to rain on anybody's parade for enjoying the music that they do and getting it through a convenient portal, so to speak. I would, and I often do, particularly to people that I work with. There's some younger folks who I work with when I'm doing gardening contracting, and I have sort of said to them, it's great that you're able to Spotify all your favorite music and stuff, but hey, consider, particularly if it's a smaller act, I know you're not going to buy their album, maybe buy a t-shirt, give them a little bit of cash up front, because that's going to make a big difference to them. So, it's this fine balancing act between being sort of a little bit militant about it, but also not wanting to rain on people enjoying the things that they enjoy.
No, and look, I think to a certain degree it was ever thus. You can look back to the beginning of recorded music and see people getting screwed as soon as companies worked out that it was more worthwhile to own songs than own recordings, and that goes through and through and through and through and through. So it's kind of the newest permutation of that particular shitty bit of behaviour.
Absolutely. I mean, we're both old enough to remember the RIAA advertising campaign, home taping kills music, but you go back further than that, and the same arguments were made when recorded music first came out. There was the argument that, recorded music would kill live music, and that was the main, income, and particularly with how music could then become dispersed geographically. You used to have situations, hundreds of years ago, where there'd be a popular song and local musicians could make a strong living from just being geographically based and performing this repertoire of popular music. It was less about the individual artist and the songs that they'd written, and supporting your local musician who was performing. So these arguments have gone on and on. The terrain that they operate in has definitely changed and continues to evolve, but the same arguments sort of springing up along the way. So I guess my point would be to people, just think about, if you've got a few spare bucks, flick them towards particularly independent artists. And I like to think Falco would sit there and nod sagely and go, yep, that's pretty decent, that's a good idea.
Yeah, and also I think it's worth supporting the weirder edges of what people do as well. Like, as you said earlier, Christian Fitness is definitely an odder project than Future of the Left. And I think it's really valuable, even, and I don't think this is what Christian Fitness is, but even when people are making like unlistenable stuff, but to give them the space to make their weird unlistenable things, because that's what then provides you innovative ideas for the pop smashes that just happen to be in 5/4 or whatever's going on.
Absolutely, and this is one of the things about the evolution of sort of the ecosystem, is that it has provided space for, I guess you could say, more niche genres, particularly in sort of electronic music. But, it does break down some of those geographical boundaries. Though I'm a little bit wary about saying that, because at the same point, there's a strong argument that actually in doing so, sometimes the removal of those geographical signifiers can actually do notable damage to things like local scenes as well, because you're not just competing with the people in your local area. Not that you're competing, but you're also part of this wider range of music that's out there, and the choice is almost endless. It's very hard to get any sort of cut through if that's what you're looking for. But so again, pros and cons all the way through. You know, it giveth with one hand and taketh away with the other.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess the really nice thing about music and Christian Fitness does this to some degree, because often songs will be built on like a starting groove that then mutates in a direction, but you know, people will always steal something that's good and use it. I'm thinking of when I was having to tech help the guy who made the Indian show playing Hindi and Punjabi film songs. Like, you could tell whenever there was like a new hip sound in America, because they would steal it and then just use it along with the massive Bollywood drum section.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, that kind of stuff is priceless as well. I think, you know, this is one thing, this is one area that I think, you know, the digital ecosystem has allowed a lot more as people do have access to things which they wouldn't normally be exposed to. And just to diverge off a little bit, but also back onto Christian Fitness, this is one of the things that I've liked about the project being less perhaps concerned about appealing to the algorithm for numerous different reasons, is he's certainly widening sort of the palette of sounds that he's using as well. There was already quite an area within the Future of the Left back catalogue where he's been using synthesizer. There's a couple of tracks, You Need Satan More Than He Needs You, or there was a big hit, Manchasm, which there is no guitar on, but fantastic. But you look at a lot of the later Christian Fitness stuff and he's playing around with synthetic strings, he's playing around with orchestral stuff, and again, you know, he's not just delivering this in the same way that you'd typically deliver, say, strings. If you listen to a track like, I need to remind myself of the name of it now because I don't want to get it wrong, The Mood As the Ship Started to Sink was downright depressing, which is a fantastic track. The strings in that are just amazing. They're borderline discordant. They set up this amazing tension. They give it almost a feel of having this sort of classical edge. And I mean, as you can tell from the name of the track, you can envision sort of the Titanic going down, to go with, you know, these hugely reverb drums going in there and this big distorted bass that comes in later on. But, you know, stuff like that I've been absolutely loving, is his expansion into a different palette of sounds, but applying his own sort of sonic sensibilities to them. So when the horns come in, you're not going to be expecting sort of Motown style horns. There would be horns that being played by Beelzebub on LSD while sitting in his bathroom in his underwear having a breakdown.
In fact, let's play that one now. So let's play The Mood As the Ship Went Down Was Downright Depressing by Christian Fitness.
Started to sink was downright depressing. I wasted my time on this cruise line for what? For these dentists. The tallest man on the buffet deck was shouting at the sky, and the sky was just yawning back at him. The cabin crew, they headed for the rafts, and who could blame them? Yes, we had to laugh. We all just water in the end. For the umpteenth time. Last splash for what? Stoner neighbors. The passengers all screamed in that blood-curdling way that confirms they know they're heading straight to hell. The captain, he was standing on the bridge, weaving lies Gravity is tired of me. Always Mr. Anderson. Gravity is tired. And we were muscled by the states. Our raw race run. We were muscled by the states. Our raw race run. We were muscled by the states. Our raw race run. We were muscled by the states. Our race run. We were muscled by the states. Our raw race run. We were muscled by the states. Our raw race run.
That was The Mood as the Ship Went Down Was Downright Depressing by Christian Fitness, the band I am discussing with Scott Common. This is Reserved Recommendations. The thing I was going to mention before we played the song as well, but people have now just listened to it with their human ears, was that as well as all of the sonic madness that you're talking about, it's another example where at the same time the lyrics are quite almost literary, because they're about, in the end, all that's left of us is stories.
Yep, so there's two refrains in there. One talks about being just water, which is a very biological view. We are made up a large percentage of water, and I mean there's an added metaphor there, and as well with the ship is sinking into obviously the water. It would be a pretty weird ship if it wasn't sinking into water. I'm just going to stop that thought right there. And of course, the other one is, as you said, in the end, we're all just stories, because that is what's left over of us, is the stories that people tell about us, or that are recorded through history. There is this he's very strong on his metaphors, and they are stacked a dozen deep. You can keep digging through them and you'll always find sort of new links. And some of his metaphors have metaphors, there's a little bit of mutation going on in there.
So we are coming up close to time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that we did before we wrapped up was plug your stuff, because you are a couple of different one-man bands. And I guess a seg into doing that would be to ask if the kind of one-man band approach of Christian Fitness has been an influence for you on your own work. I'm particularly thinking of the kind of stuff that you've done with the K1500 project.
100%.
I remember a song which had a very long title about debating rational people on the internet, which was very appealing to me.
Oh, that one was that was probably my shortest title. It was called The Rationals. But yeah, to answer your question, 100%, finding, it sounds a little sappy to say it, but, finding a new band which invigorated me, the way that Falco's work really did spur me back into writing music again, and reminding myself that, no matter what the outcome in terms of success or lack of success, because to be honest, I don't push it very, very hard. There is a degree of resignation that I've had my good, 8, 9, 10 shots at it. And I really enjoy writing songs, and it's kind of nice to be a little bit freed of the need to be sort of pushing to be the next big thing. I can just concentrate on doing things which I enjoy, which may be a little bit weird. But yeah, it definitely inspired me in terms of getting back involved in songwriting, but also in terms of some of the approaches that I took to the sonic elements in some of my songs, and certainly my titling. I've become quite the big fan of, shall we say, more wordy titles such as Mudcake Soldier Crying in the Rain is the new old man shouting at the clouds.
And I think I read a thing which was about writing for TV by Dan Harmon, the guy who created Community and Rick and Morty, but he was talking about that the barrier for people who want to start writing is the idea that they'll write badly, and that kind of embracing potential badness as an outcome without worrying about it too much is how you get through that. And I think certainly in my work that's been a big thing, is that not having any expected outcome is immensely freeing, because you can just go, right, well, this is the thing I've done. I've pursued this particular idea to its logical conclusion. It might be good, it might be not.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, actually, it's one of my favorite refrains is, don't stop doing something you enjoy just because you're bad at it. And there's a proviso attached to that, is conversely, if there's something that you're good at which you don't enjoy, perhaps stop doing it and let somebody else have a shot. So, it's one of those areas where I think the barriers that you set up for yourself are the biggest challenge, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong with producing something which you may think is bad, and one person's bad music is another person's fucking fantastic music. Oh, sorry, I just swore on the radio.
Oh, look, I've been doing it consistently because this plays after The Watershed, and people who listen to podcasts are responsible for their own ears, so...
If I'd known that, then I can guarantee you I probably would have been a little bit more explicit. In fact, my partner has a tendency to say, my God, you swear a lot. So I've been quite restrained here. But don't stop doing something that you enjoy just because you think you're bad at it. And taste is a fickle thing. Just because you think something is bad, somebody else may get a whole lot of enjoyment out of that. And who are you to say that they shouldn't?
No, definitely, and not to present this as a slam on your work or that of Falco's, but I feel like there is a premium unduly placed on virtuosity. And I am someone who would much more happily listen to Christian Fitness or Tom Waits in all of the pots and pans mode than I would Joe Satriani, because past a certain point, virtuosity is highly diminishing returns for me personally.
Absolutely, and I think from a listener's point of view as well, virtuosity often isn't directed towards the listener. It's often directed towards other people who have the technical knowledge to recognise what virtuosity is in of itself. I have nothing against highly sophisticated, complicated work, but it's got to be used to serve a greater purpose. And it's great if you can do that sort of stuff, but again, just because you can't do that sort of stuff or don't have an interest in doing that sort of stuff doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing stuff at all. Virtuosity has its place, but you've got to think about why you're deploying it.
Yeah, no, I think cultivating interesting taste goes a lot further than virtuosity, and I think that's something that you definitely hear in Christian Fitness in particular, because he will start with what can be quite rudimentary building blocks, but then he'll build them off into flying buttresses in the middle of nowhere. Strain architectural metaphors.
That's a great description, actually. I can see Falco quite happily sitting in the middle of the year in his flying fortress built out of bricks which came flying out of his garden. That's a perfect mental image for me. And he'd probably be throwing beer cans at all the Joe Satrianis down below him as well. So
excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for talking today. Final question. I have an answer to this question, but I'll see if you do as well. If people listened to the 2 Christian Fitness songs, or they've already listened to Future of the Left and they dig it, what else would you recommend that they go and find? I mean, feel free to say the K1500 project if you want, but anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, to a certain extent, I'd love people to sort of see some sort of link between the type of music that Falco's producing and my own. But they could, if that was in their ballpark, there's a no longer existent band by a friend of mine called The Postures. They're on Bandcamp. They have a sort of compiled album, very much sort of noise rock punk sort of stuff. I'd highly recommend that if they enjoyed Christian Fitness. It's possibly a little bit more abrasive again, but some real sort of Kiwi twists on that sort of noise punk approach to things. And I think that's a real hard one, because I'd actually recommend people to just push their boundaries a little bit further. Maybe not listen to a recommendation of what I'd suggest, but maybe click some random links from a Bandcamp page and take the time not just to listen to the first 10-20 seconds of a song, but actually, listen to a couple of songs the whole way through, maybe even listen to a song more than once, to work out if you like it. But put in some time with some music which you may initially find a little bit difficult on the ears, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. My recommendation was going to be a band called Tongue, which is spelled Tunng. They are much folkier than Christian Fitness or Future of the Left, but the thing that they share with them is using odd sounds and having quite a strange lyrical standpoint. They would write songs which have that kind of slightly abstracted point of view, and they will also do things like have a lovely finger-picked guitar song where the rhythm section is like the sound of cutlery in a restaurant looped so that it slowly becomes a rhythm when you listen to it for long enough.
Yep, that sort of stuff that would fit in perfectly. And I've heard of, and I think probably heard a few tracks by them in my time as well, but my memory is certainly not what it used to be, shall we say.
Excellent. So, by way of a parting note, plug your shit. Where can people find things that you've done on the internet, all that kind of stuff?
Okay, so primarily Bandcamp. You can find me the K1500 project, K1500 project. I also have sort of more of a, synth pop type thing, which I've been playing around with, Mr. Muscovado Orange. If you want to see any of my old bands, then I have a YouTube channel which I just upload all sorts of stuff to. If you don't want to go to Bandcamp, you can actually find all of my stuff up there for free as well if YouTube's your thing. But do consider dropping me a couple of bucks if you enjoy it. Those would be the two main places, Bandcamp and YouTube. But I'd recommend people to go wild and click on some things that they wouldn't normally click on.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Hugh.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o Tangata o Manawatu. The show is produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. You can find me on the internet at Objective Realty on Twitter, and you can find the show on Facebook under Reserved Recommendations. If you've got a reserved recommendation of your own, feel free to pitch it to me in either of those two places. And if you enjoyed the show, why not go ahead and recommend it to a friend? You can find past episodes at www.mpr.nz/show/reserved on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit radio station. If you enjoy this or any of their other fine audio programming, why not fling them a couple of dollars? Go to mpr.nz/donate for more information.